Hello everyone, Rick here at Rick's Automotive. In this video we're going to go through the steps on replacing the passenger side and the front engine mounts on this 2006 Acura TL. Okay, to remove the side engine mount first, you've got a 17mm here and two 14mm here. There's also a 10mm ground bolted to the back here. You can actually leave that attached. You don't need to take that off. We're just going to set this bracket aside. And to get to the 17, you're going to want to remove the power steering reservoir. You don't have to remove the hose, just remove the reservoir from the bracket. To do so, just stick your hand underneath of it, lift up, and it pops out of the way. And kind of tuck that away there in the back. Oop. Sometimes it saves, sometimes it doesn't. There we go. And it gives you much more access to this bolt here. As you can see, this one here is collapsed. I was doing a power steering pump resale on this car and I noticed the bracket was resting on the mount. You see this thing is just deteriorated and worn beyond belief. So we'll set that aside. But first we'll go ahead and take these bolts out, get this bracket off, and then we'll move on to the two bolts that hold the mount on. Okay, I've got those bolts off. These were 14s. Again, this was a 17. And we left that ground bracket on the back. It's still attached. You're just going to tuck this back in here out of the way. Right there should be fine. And then the next, you've got a 17 here in the front. You can see right there. Adjust my light. There we go. Got a 17mm here in the front. And you've also got one right there in the back. Those two come out, and then we'll remove them out from the car. Got the side mount out. Just wanted to show you these pieces here are supposed to be tucked around the side there, and they're not. They're just falling apart. And then you see it's all torn there when this rocks back, and when the engine, when you accelerate, press the gas, the engine just rocks back and it's tearing the mount there. So I'm going to replace this guy, and we're also going to take the front mount out and replace it, which I'm going to move on to next and show you how to get the front mount out. I want to put some fender covers down. I already had them down previously from the power steering repair, but you are going to be leaning over here, so protect the customer's paint. I put the fender cover on the front of the car as well. To access the front motor mount, to replace it, it's straight down here. You see that rusty bracket there? There's a 17mm bolt my finger's pointing to. That is the front engine mount underneath of that. So to get that out of here, you have to take a few things off. I'm taking the oil cap off. There's a 14mm here holding a bracket. That bracket houses the oxygen sensor connections, as well as this wire here. This is going to move this out of the way. And the coolant reservoir, this is going to have to come out. It's held on by, there's a 10mm right here. That comes out, and then the whole thing comes out of the way there. So I'm going to get those things off, and then we'll move on from there. Got the oil cap off, got a rag in there, don't want to drop anything there. Actually, I'm doing the valve cover gaskets on this engine too, so it won't be that big of a deal, but just for demonstration purpose, I went and put a stuffed rag in there, that way nothing falls inside the engine. Got the bracket off, got the O2 sensors disconnected, everything's out of the way. Got the coolant reservoir out of the way, so you can see how open this is now. Next, I'm going to take this rusty bracket off. It's held on by two 17mm nuts on each side. Got the bracket off. Set that aside. Next, I'm going to take this bolt out. This is a 14mm. And then once I take that off, I'm going to go ahead and take this bracket here off. Got that 14mm out. So now the mount is completely separated from the engine. And then the passenger side mount is still off. So this engine will move around quite a bit. Not with your hands, but if you were to drive it, it would come right out of the car. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the splash shield that runs along the bottom of the car. And I'm also going to get a jack stand and a piece of wood to place under the oil pan to, we're going to lower the car down on top of the jack, and this engine is going to raise up quite a bit to allow us some clearance to get this bracket off. There's a 14mm bolt here, and there's two on the bottom, one on each side. This bracket has to come off to get the mount out. So we're going to raise the car up in the air and start that. I've got the splash shield down here. I just only took it off halfway. There's two clips here on the side behind the passenger side tire. Took those off, and there was a few clips that ran along here that I just pulled out, and got a bungee cord holding out of the way. This is the bottom of the mount. This hard line here, excuse me, goes to a vacuum line after just north of this little retainer clip here. So I'm going to remove that from the bottom of the mount next. Got the vacuum line off, just tucked it, bent a little bit and tucked it out of the way there. Next, I'm going to go ahead and rest. All this fluid here is from the power steering leak that I already fixed. But the next, I'm going to put a piece of wood underneath the oil pan here on a jack stand. You're not going to put a jack stand directly on this because you will damage the oil pan. So I'm going to put a piece of wood and a jack stand and lower the car back down on top of that. To show you what I got going on here. So I've got the jack stand with a piece of wood on the oil pan and the A-pipe. Make sure you don't get it, if it's a large piece like this one, make sure you don't get it stuck in the subframe. But that allowed me to move the engine quite a bit to access those bolts. Let me show you that. Okay, I've lowered the vehicle on top of the jack stand and the piece of wood. So that wood's now resting on the oil pan and the A-pipe. You can see the engine is slanted quite a bit. The passenger side is higher than the driver's side. Now do this at your own risk. I've done this a lot. I've done this you know, several times, so I know exactly where to place the engine, but just keep in mind you've got hoses and wiring harnesses and a lot of things that are still in place, engine mounts, exhaust, you know, axles. So the more and more you tweak this, the more and more you run the risk of, you know, stretching the other engine mounts or damaging one of those components. So be very careful when you do this. Start hearing funny noises, creaks or pops or something, definitely stop and check and see what's going on. But that's about how you want to go. You definitely don't want to go much higher than that. I can show you where I'm at on the front here. Remember, this was even here. The bolt hole went through here. Now you can slide that, barely slide that underneath the bracket now. So it's about as high as you want to go for that. But now I can access the 14mm bolts on each side. Okay, so I've got that bracket off. I actually just set it to the side here. I left the oxygen sensor wire connected to the bracket. There was enough room. I was able to set it to the side there. Next, I'm going to take the mount out. So this is held in by 14mm bolts. They're right here. They're at all four corners. You got 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can leave this rubber piece on or take it off. Just make sure you take note of the direction that it's installed, because as you're actually going to transfer this rubber piece here onto the new mount, it does not come with a new one. So I'll go ahead and take it off. That way you can get to those 14mm bolts a little easier. Oh my gosh, you see that to the top of the mount just came off. Completely separated. That's not good. So I've got those 4 bolts removed. So I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the car. I'm going to need 2 hands for this. I'm going to go ahead and set the camera down real quick. Okay, got the front mount out of the car. You can see this is supposed to be attached, and it's not. It's completely separated. That's usually what happens with these when they go bad. They usually just separate. Sometimes all the fluid leaks out. This one still has. You see there's some fluid in there, so something in there, but this wasn't doing anything. So this usually, I think like I mentioned in the other video, the front one always fails first. At least in my personal experience, the front one always fails first. Then it goes on to this one here, the passenger one, and then once this one, if these two get neglected, then it goes on to the rear. And once the rear mount and these 2 fail, then it goes on to the transmission mount. So you definitely want to address these before the cost adds up, because the back one's a pain in the butt, just definitely worse than the front one. So I'm going to go ahead and get the new ones out of the box, and we'll compare them, and then we'll go ahead and install them. All right, got the new mounts out of the bag in the box. They are genuine OEM Honda parts. Front mount looks nice and smooth, stiff. There's no separation. It's all one piece. The customers was not as cut in two like I showed you earlier. Same on the passenger side mount. It's got a nice dust cover. This is how it should look. This is how the customer's looks, and it's nice and stiff and you know, not loose. So just want to take that opportunity to show you the difference between the two, what they should look like. I'm putting the new ones back in the car in reverse order. Should I find a reason to stop the video and cover something, I will. Just want to give you guys a quick tip while you're putting the the new mount back in. I've got all the 4 bolts secured to the subframe, and don't forget to put that rubber cover back on. Make sure it's going one way. And I think this mount only allows you to put it on one way, but some Hondas and Acuras, this front dust cover, you can put it on both ways. But it's got a little notch that you can't see anymore, but it's covered up. But it only allows it to go on one way. So make sure you put that back on. And when you go to put this bolt back in, the 14mm in the front here, sometimes the hole doesn't line up. So just lower the engine enough to where it's not fully resting on the mount, but it still lines up. And you could actually take a screwdriver and you can move this piece of the mount back and forth, like so, to allow you to line up the bolt hole that's in the bracket, so you can get the bolt in. Here's a tip for you. I'm just putting some anti-seize on these threads here. These are the bolts that go through the side mount into the subframe. They go in those two holes right there. They tend to get pretty gunked up on these cars. You see all the rust. I've already cleaned the threads up with tap and die set. This way, if I ever go take these mounts, that mount off again, you know, like for a time belt or something, they come out much easier. All right, guys, that wraps up this repair. Front and side mount are now installed, and everything is secure back where it was. I am doing a valve cover video for, valve cover gasket video, replacing the valve cover gaskets on the front and rear cylinder heads, along with each spark plug tube seal. It's leaking some oil down around the front of the valve cover here, so there'll be a link in the bottom of this video. If you want to watch that, please do. Hopefully this video helped you. If it did, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for watching.